Hello, and welcome to episode 25 of A Week in Watches, a weekly look back at interesting watch news and stories. I'm your host, Zach Weiss. Thank you for joining me. It's the day before Thanksgiving. The office is mostly empty, except for me, Patrick, and a handful of people. I'm ready for a few days off, to be honest. But first, we've got some pretty good stories. Actually, it was a surprisingly excellent week. There are a couple watches we're going to talk about that I am going to try not to purchase. But before we get there, this week's sponsor is Watch Crunch, a dedicated social media site for watch enthusiasts. This week we're going to take another look inside what's going on and highlight a couple of interesting threads on watchcrunch.com. Stay tuned for that later in this episode. Hamilton cuts the Murph down to size. Remember the Murph? Interstellar, the fall of 2014. Well, I remember the movie and the watch pretty well, if not the season. Christopher Nolan's sci-fi epic, starring Matthew McConaughey as Joseph Cooper and Jessica Chastain as Murph Cooper, his daughter, and another protagonist in the film. It's a wild sci-fi ride, and a custom Hamilton watch comes to the rescue. That is a pretty terrible description of the movie. It has been a while since I watched it, so go check it out. I recall it being quite fun. Actually, maybe I'll do that over the long weekend myself. The watch featured a mix of components, sort of custom tailored for the film. Cathedral hands, a modernish field dial, classic sort of Hamilton case. It looked like a Hamilton, just slightly altered. And it was never actually meant for production. However, Hamilton showed the watch at Baselworld one year, just in a little vitrine as a prop. I remember seeing it there, and people went really crazy for it. They assumed because it was on display that they'd have a watch coming out, and people were super excited because they loved the movie, and Hamilton took the cue. So in 2019, they launched the Murph. It was a very cool watch. It was also a bit of a large watch, 42 millimeters, but that was actually accurate to what the prop worn in the film was. So, they stayed true to the watch that everyone was fawning over. However, personally speaking, and I think a lot of people would agree with this, it was on the larger side for sort of a three-hand watch in that style. Well, now it's 2022, almost 8 years after the launch of the original film, and the Murph is back. But it's back, and now it's 38 millimeters. Finally. And that's pretty perfect for this watch. I think the 38 millimeter sort of Hamilton field watches are, really a sweet spot for sort of a modern take on the field watch design. It's also 44.7 millimeters long, 11.1 millimeters thick, and features the H10 80-hour automatic movement based on the ETA 2824. Comes in at $895 and is available now, so it's a good deal. And for those of you who have been waiting for the Murph all these years, maybe even made some sort of mod in the meantime, you can finally get the 38 millimeter Hamilton Murph. And it looks really nice, I have to say. Just don't go near any black holes with it. That's a reference to the movie. Anyway, Atelier Wen alters perception. Atelier Wen is a really cool brand. They're a micro indie sort of brand putting focus on Chinese-made watches, watchmaking, and craft. Their first watch was very popular, quite newsworthy. It featured a porcelain dial that was made in a traditional way. They followed that up with a line of watches called the Perception, which is an integrated steel sports watch with a very elegant case that isn't contrived the way a lot of sort of steel, integrated sports watch designs are. You know what I mean, where they sort of look like a certain group of watches from the 70s sort of thing. This looks like its own thing while still playing in that territory. It was also made of 904L steel, oddly enough, and was under 10 millimeters thick, thanks to featuring a unusual movement, a dang dong automatic movement that apparently is quite thin. Once again, this is about celebrating Chinese watchmaking, so it was featuring what they believe is a quite nice and high-end Chinese-made movement. We actually have a really nice review of the original Perception by Brad Holmes on the site, which we'll link to. The case back features a Shishi or Stone Guardian lion with a display window as its mouth. So rather than the full circle, you have this sort of like kidney shape, which is the mouth of this really cool looking motif. It's all around just a very attractive watch, but the dial is really the star. So the dial of the Perception features a real guilloche rose engine turned dial by the only guilloche master in China, Master Cheng. It features a beautiful wave pattern, sort of wavy, weavy pattern. The guilloche dials just have a have a look to them that is sort of incomparable. It's available in a few colors, and it was just shy of $3,000. So really fantastic deal for a real guilloche dial, as well as just everything else you were getting with that watch. They really made something very cool, very popular, sold out. This week, Atelier Wen has announced that they teamed up with Wristcheck, which is a Hong Kong-based retailer, to create a new version of the Perception, a collaboration and limited edition. This one is titanium rather than 904L, which is a great idea because titanium is obviously the best material for watches. And the dial is once again the star. So this time it features a jade green dial with a different guilloche pattern. So the dial already, the color is absolutely beautiful. Obviously jade playing off of, some cultural relevance there, but the guilloche pattern is a little bit more irregular and actually features this incredible twist to it. So it's this twisting, twirling pattern, looks almost magical or like, something reptilian. It's really quite profoundly beautiful. And it's all the more impressive because it is once again made in the traditional guilloche manner using a rose engine. As I said before, this is a limited edition. It's limited to 100 pieces, and it is only available through Wristcheck. The price is $3,400, which is once again a very good deal. I do not know if these are sold out, unfortunately, but there's very few of them. They're very desirable, so you can do the math. Regardless, Atelier Wen is definitely a brand to keep your eye on in the future. And now, another look at WatchCrunch.com. Conversations on WatchCrunch can be very diverse, from simple wrist checks and discussions of new releases to complicated concepts and guides. There's polls, reviews, states of the collection, lots of comparisons, and of course, just the news. Here are a couple of threads that stood out to me this week. What I wish I knew before I started collecting Part 1. Budgeting. A detailed and lengthy breakdown of budgeting and how to look at costs associated with watch collecting, a topic that is rarely delved into. A poll that caught my eye takes a look at 904L versus 316L steel, which currently has 316 leading 904, but both well behind those who just don't care so long as it's a great design. A nice conversation in the comments there too. For those of you who are just looking to keep up on what the watch media, such as Worn and Wound, are covering, check out The Daily Crunch, a feed of all the newest articles and posts by your favorite watch sites. Check those out and give me a follow at Zach Weiss, that's ZACHWEISS. I'll see you and your watches there. Oris dropped some fire with a new limited edition. Oris, the guys with the bear. Yeah, that's a joke. Oris is a major brand. A big fan of them over here at Worn and Wound. They're a leader in the Swiss independent space, particularly at sort of an accessible price point. So the kind of thing we talk about quite frequently. Oris does a lot of collaborations with interesting organizations as part of their Change for the Better campaign, which is a sort of like charity and awareness campaign, sort of through commerce, through storytelling. This year alone, they've teamed up with several different companies, such as Wings of Hope and the Billion Oyster Project. Their newest limited edition is a collaboration and team up with Coulson Aviation, which is an aerial firefighting organization based in Canada. They fight wildfires worldwide, obviously particularly in North America. The watch itself, well, one look at it and you'll know it is inspired by fire. But there's more to it than that. So they created this new Coulson Pro Pilot limited edition based on, obviously, their Pro Pilot line, which is actually my personal favorite line from the Oris collection. I think it's a really nice take on the modern pilot's watch that doesn't feel like anyone else's take on the modern pilot's watch. But this one is kind of a radical departure from the regular as well, though it still has the sort of visual cues there. Features a 41mm case, but the mid case is 3D printed carbon fiber. That's a new one for me. We've seen one or two brands doing 3D printing. We've seen some carbon fiber, various lightweight composites, but never 3D printed carbon fiber before. So that's actually a pretty exciting development. Apparently they had to create this material for this. They worked with a university, and it features a material that I hadn't heard of called PEKK, P-E-K-K, which stands for polyether ketone. And it's a thermoplastic of some sort. Anyway, apparently that makes the carbon fiber hold together. In addition to carbon fiber, the caseback, crown, and bezel are titanium with a sort of dark gray PVD DLC coating on it to keep the black smoky theme. The whole thing comes in at 65 grams, which, is pretty light. The look of it, because it is made out of this 3D printed carbon, is that it's matte black, almost as though it was burnt to a crisp. The dial, however, is pure fire. It's a bright red to orange gradient that's sort of a striking blaze of color. I have to say, it looks really, really good. When I first opened images of this, it made me stop and say, wow, that's a pretty striking looking watch. Inside, of course, is the Oris Caliber 400, which is their 5-day automatic that is backed by a 10-year warranty. The watch is limited to 1,000 pieces and costs 4,200 Swiss francs, which is about 4,400 USD. And I believe they are available now. It's a pretty hot release. What do you think? And now it is time for the release of the week. Hanhart flies back to the future. Sorry, that one didn't really make any sense, but it was the best I could do. Hanhart is a German brand located in the Black Forest region. They were founded in 1882 by Willy Hanhart, and actually in Switzerland, but they moved to Germany. You'd have to ask him why. When I think Hanhart, I think chronographs. Specifically monopushers. Since 1938, they've been making chronographs, many for the military. They're known for having been worn by many people, including Steve McQueen, who it was a watch that he actually chose for himself, which makes it even better. He's not a bad spokesperson as far as iconic wrists go. Like I said before, they've made lots of monopushers, and that includes into the modern era. Monopushers always are rare, but they used to be much rarer still, but Hanhart always had at least one available for you. And they did so affordably, which is another thing that made the brand really stand out. In 2015, I reviewed the Hanhart Pioneer Mono Control, which left a truly lasting impression. That was a watch I compared many other watches to for a long time. It had a gorgeous silver dial with just absolutely incredible printing and finishing on it. The case was absolutely beautiful. It was just all around an incredibly impressive watch, and it was a mono pusher that I believe featured a movement modified by Le Jouperet, and it was a great value at under 3K. It's still under 3K, amazingly. But I'm not here to talk about old watches. Hanhart has announced the watch that many of us, specifically me, have long waited for. Quick rewind once again back to 2020. Hanhart released the 417 ES chronographs, which is a sort of a remake / revisit to a 1950s model, I believe was a military pilot's watch. That is the model that was known to have been worn by Mr. McQueen. They launched it in 42 millimeters, which was a bit larger than the original. Still absolutely gorgeous with a coined bezel, which is sort of a signature on many of their watches. A 2-register layout, really beautiful typeface. Actually, they're like historical logo on it, which is a very cool looking logo. They first launched it as a collaboration or exclusively through Revolution / The Rake, and it was bronze. Which was unexpected, but still pretty cool. They then followed it in steel, still in 42 millimeters. Then earlier this year, they launched them in 39 millimeters, which was, closer to the original's diameter, which is probably in the 38, 39 scale. It's also just pretty much like a perfect size for a watch of this type. Too small would be kind of too delicate, but 39 is going to fit really, really nicely. Actually tried it on at Wind Up Watch Fair because Hanhart had a booth, which was awesome. However, this week they made them just perfect. So they launched 4 new versions with Panda and Inverse Panda dials in both 42 and 39 millimeters to satisfy everyone. So they look great. Gotta love a Panda dial. But the kicker is that they feature a new manual wound flyback column wheel chronograph movement called the AMT 5100. Now, this is a movement that is made by Sellita under their new AMT umbrella, which apparently is sort of a subdivision of Sellita that is focusing on higher-end calibers. This is the first time I'm hearing of this or seeing this, and it's clearly a very exciting thing if they're making things like flyback column wheel chronographs. And part of the reason why they chose this movement for this new watch and why it really makes sense in the 417 is because the originals from the 1950s were flyback column wheel chronographs as well. In case you you haven't noticed, I'm a little bit biased on the show towards titanium and towards chronographs, so that totally colors what we cover here on A Week in Watches, but you're just gonna deal with it. This is super exciting. It's an iconic design. Once again, it's a Panda, which is awesome. It's a cool movement, and flybacks are pretty rare. We happen to have talked about one last week through Messina Lab, and he did the Type 20, but there's only 25 of those flybacks. I mentioned there, once again, that it was rare. Maybe it's becoming something that'll be more common, particularly if a brand like Sellita is going to be including them in movements. But up until now, they were really few and far between. I actually, as a chronograph collector, I have never owned one. In fact, I've never even come close to owning one. So it's pretty exciting that there is this option out there. But the best part, once again, is that they are fairly reasonably priced. So the 417 ES flyback chronographs come in at $2,560. That's not cheap, but it's not overpriced either. And it's frankly just a really great value, which is part of why I love German watches in general. They tend to be priced right, if you will. Anyway, you can check that one out more on Hanhart's website and also at watchbuys.com if you are in the USA. And that's it for this episode of A Week in Watches. This is airing after Thanksgiving, so I hope you had a great one. We'd like to thank our sponsor once again, watchcrunch.com. Be sure to head over there and check out those threads that I mentioned earlier in the episode, or just browse at your leisure. And also, don't forget to head to wornaround.com daily for news, reviews, and everything else watches. And if you like this video, please do like it and subscribe it or rate it on whatever podcast platform you are listening to it on. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.